The twilight plains were breathing in long, tired sighs when Colt Harrow rode through them, his silhouette a dark slash against a sky the color of cooling ash. The land stretched silent in every direction, a wide and wounded thing, and the only sound was the soft thud of hooves pressing into dirt thirsty for rain. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured like an old man remembering a hurt he never learned to forget. Colt tugged the brim of his hat lower, more out of habit than need. The evening light wasn't harsh. It was gentle, falling over him like a memory that didn't know whether to comfort or haunt. Nights like these always stirred the part of him he preferred to ride past, the part that remembered the sister he once failed to save, the voice he didn't reach in time, the plea that still echoed in his dreams. He forced his breath steady. "Ain't no ghosts out here but the ones we bring," he muttered. But the land seemed to disagree. Because that was when he heard it. A sound carried on the wind, fragile, broken, almost swallowed by the coming storm. "Help us!" Colt straightened. For a dozen heartbeats, the world held still. Even his horse shifted anxiously, ears flicking toward the distant call. Then it came again, soft, cracked open by fear and exhaustion. "Please, help!" Colt turned his horse toward the sound, each step slow and deliberate, as though he feared the truth waiting ahead. The horizon flickered with distant lightning, painting the earth in brief bursts of white-blue that made every shadow tremble. And then he saw them. 3 women sprawled in the mud near the riverbed, their dresses torn, skin streaked with dirt, hair tangled from struggle. They looked like flowers thrown into a storm, battered, but refusing to disappear. The eldest tried to stand when she heard Colt approach, her voice sharp with stubborn pride even as her body betrayed her. "We don't need charity," she said, but her knees buckled, and she fell back to the earth with a soft, pained cry. Colt dismounted immediately. He didn't speak, not yet. Words could frighten wounded creatures, and these 3 looked as brittle as frost on old glass. The second woman, Unia, though Colt didn't know her name yet, was curled slightly, hands pressed to her ribs as though trying to hold her breath inside her lungs. Her lips formed soundless prayers, their broken rhythm almost as soft as the rain beginning to fall. And the youngest, Lark, glared up at Colt with fierce defiance, though tears streaked new paths through the mud on her cheeks. "Don't touch us," she hissed, her voice trembling. "We're fine. We just need a minute." But people who were fine didn't collapse in riverbed mud, shivering as thunder rolled overhead. Colt knelt beside them slowly, lowering himself with a kind of care he wished someone had shown his sister long ago. The memory of her face flickered in his mind, brown eyes pleading, hands trembling. He swallowed hard, pushing back the familiar burn behind his ribs. "You're hurt," he said softly. "Ain't no shame in that." Mara, the eldest, lifted her chin. "Shame's all we've been given today." A crack of lightning lit the plains, and for a heartbeat Colt saw the truth in their eyes. Fear, humiliation, hunger, and something worse, rejection. The kind that left scars deeper than bruises. "What happened?" Colt asked, but his voice was gentle, like asking the wind to recall where it had been. Mara looked away. Unia whispered, "We were run off, like dogs." Lark spat mud. "Because our name's Dalton. Because folks think our daddy's debts make us pests." Colt felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not yet, but a knowing. He had seen this before. People in these parts could be cruel when pride overruled mercy. "We ain't wanted in town," Mara added, her voice barely above the rain's increasing patter. "Sheriff wouldn't even look at us. Told us to move along. Said we'd only cause trouble." A muscle in Colt's jaw twitched. "And this?" he asked, touching the edge of a torn sleeve carefully. "Elias Venter's men," Unia whispered. "Said our land's his now. Said if we were smart, we'd leave quietly. We didn't leave quiet enough." The shame in her voice cut deeper than the story itself. Colt let out a breath, slow and quiet. These women had fought, resisted, held their pride, and been punished for it. The rain thickened, cold droplets soaking through their clothes. Without a word, Colt shrugged off his coat and placed it over their shoulders one by one. Each movement deliberate, reverent, like tending to broken relics. Mara tried to push it away. "We can't take." "Yes, you can," Colt said softly. "Storm'll be on us soon." He slipped an arm beneath Unia's shoulders, lifting her gently. She let out a small gasp, but didn't resist. He guided her toward his horse, settling her across the saddle. Lark tried to stand to prove she didn't need help, but her legs gave way. Colt caught her before she fell, and for a moment her face pressed against his chest. When she stepped back, her fierce eyes softened just a fraction, gratitude flickering like a candle behind the storm of her pride. Mara was the last to accept his hand. For a moment she stared at it, calloused palm open, waiting. Something in her face wavered, like a pane of glass catching the last light of day, not sure whether to shine or shatter. Finally, she placed her hand in his. A simple gesture, but Colt felt something in his chest loosen, something he hadn't realized was clenched. He led them through the rain, guiding his horse carefully. The sky had opened fully now, pouring cold water over the plains until everything gleamed in silver streaks. Mud sucked at Colt's boots, thunder rolled low, and yet the world felt strangely steady. Behind him, 3 breath-weary sisters clung to the saddle, trusting him more by necessity than choice. But trust was trust, even when born in mud. By the time the way-station barn appeared like a dark ribcage on the horizon, the storm had swallowed their tracks entirely, erasing every trace of how they had suffered. Colt glanced back at the faint shapes behind him. "You're safe now," he murmured. And though none of the sisters replied, the quiet he heard felt different, less like fear, more like the first fragile breath of hope. The barn smelled of old hay and distant summers, of better days that had dried into memory. Lantern light flickered along the beams like shy fire, throwing warm shadows across the boards. It wasn't much shelter, but after the storm's cold teeth, it felt like stepping into the arms of something gentle. Colt Harrow guided the Dalton sisters inside, one careful step at a time. Unia winced with every movement, breathing shallow. Lark tried to pretend she didn't lean on him, though her legs shook like newborn foals. Mara walked ahead on willpower alone, jaw tight, shoulders trembling beneath Colt's coat. When the door creaked shut behind them, the storm's roar softened into a muffled hum. The barn was an island now, floating in a sea of rain. Colt knelt by the old stove first, striking a match. The flame flared bright, then settled into a soft glow. He fed it bits of kindling, coaxing warmth from the cold iron. The sisters stood close together, unsure whether to sit or bolt. "You can rest," Colt said softly, never looking directly at them, giving pride its dignity. "Ain't no one here but us." Mara's chin dipped, the smallest gnawed. "Thank you," she whispered, like a confession. Unia eased down first, her fingers trembling as she settled onto the hay. Lark plopped down beside her with a stubborn huff, crossing her arms as though daring anyone, including her own fear, to say she needed help. Colt brought them blankets he'd carried for years, worn soft at the edges. He wrapped Unia's shoulders carefully, the fabric brushing against her skin with a whisper. Her eyes lifted to his, a quiet gratitude swelling like warm water filling a cold cup. Lark watched him like she wasn't sure whether to trust him or test him. Mara watched him as though she wanted to understand him. Colt prepared a small pot of broth, its steam rising in gentle spirals. The scent filled the barn, simple, earthy, comforting. When he handed each woman a tin cup, their fingers brushed his. Little sparks, soft as the embers in the stove. Nourishment, yes, but also dignity returned one sip at a time. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was rain tapping the roof, steady as a heartbeat. Then Unia cleared her throat, voice barely more than a wavering thread. "We didn't expect to wake up alive." "You were tougher than the storm," Colt said simply. She blinked fast. She wasn't used to being seen that way. Mara set her cup aside. "We were chased off our own land, Mr. Harrow. Our home burned. Our supplies taken." She said the words like stones she'd been carrying since dawn. Colt's jaw tightened. "Elias Venter," he said, not a question. Mara's gaze flickered with surprise. "You know him." "Seen his kind before," Colt answered. "Big enough to think the law bends with his mood." Lark spat a bitter breath. "Sheriff Lang sure bends." Unia rubbed her ribs and looked at Colt carefully. "Why are you helping us? You don't know us." Colt didn't answer at first. He busied himself with feeding more wood into the stove, eyes lowered, shadows slipping across his face. Finally, he said, "Once, someone called for help. I didn't get there in time." His voice was quiet, each word rolled in regret. "I don't ride past folks who fall now." The sisters fell silent, each holding the weight of his confession gently. Unia's hand moved on its own, a soft, almost unconscious gesture. She touched his wrist. A small, human warmth. Not pity. Understanding. Colt didn't pull away. The storm continued its wild sermon outside, but inside the barn, something steadier began forming. A fragile connection, braided from shared hurt and simple grace. Lark broke the silence. "They'll come lookin' for us. Elias's men don't quit easy." "We'll handle it," Colt replied. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. Mara crossed her arms. "We can't keep running." "No," Colt said. "You won't." The stove crackled softly, casting golden light over their faces. The storm's edge shifted, its voice fading into distant growls. Mara leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking her pride. She let her eyes close for just a moment, but a moment was all it took. Her breathing softened. Unia dozed off soon after, head resting on her sister's shoulder. Lark, trying so hard to remain awake, eventually folded forward onto her knees like a tiny warrior bowing to sleep. Colt watched over them with the quiet seriousness of a man who had once failed to protect and refused to fail again. He moved silently through the barn, checking the doors, the windows, the shadows. His hand brushed the grip of his revolver, not out of eagerness, but preparedness. Colt Harrow was not a man who sought conflict. But he had learned long ago that protecting the broken meant standing between them and the world's cruelty, even when his own bones trembled. Hours passed. The storm dwindled. The embers in the stove glowed deep red, pulsing like the barn's slow, steady heartbeat. When the sisters stirred awake, Colt was sitting near the door, hat low, listening to the night. Mara lifted her head. "Did you sleep at all?" "No need," Colt said. Storms moved on. Riders passed by once. Unia stiffened. Lark's eyes widened. "But they didn't find us," Colt added. "Not tonight." His voice carried something firm, like a promise he'd carve into the world if he had to. Mara met his gaze. And in that moment, the pride that had once been armor softened into trust. Thin, fragile, but real. "What do we do now?" Unia whispered. Colt stood and dusted off his coat, offering them each a hand, not to lift them, but to stand beside them. "We go back," he said. "To town. To Elias. To the sheriff." Lark scoffed. "Why? They hate us." "Then we'll show 'em something stronger than hate," Colt said. Mara frowned. "What's that?" Colt's voice was low, almost tender. "Truth. And a people who stand tall together." The sisters exchanged looks, fear and disbelief wrestling with something they hadn't felt in days. Hope. A small flame, flickering, growing. Behind them, the embers in the stove pulsed softly, as if agreeing. Morning arrived like a whispered apology, pale and trembling over the horizon. The storm clouds had retreated into the distance, leaving the plains washed clean, glittering with dew like a field of quiet stars. As the first light touched the barn's battered boards, the Dalton sisters rose slowly, stretching sore limbs, brushing hay from their clothes. Colt Harrow stepped outside first, breathing in the cold dawn air. It tasted of dust, wet earth, and second chances. Behind him, the sisters followed, Mara steadying Unia, Lark already squinting at the road with her stubborn chin tilted high. "You sure about this?" Mara asked. Her voice was low, but something new steadied it, something like resolve cracking through her fear. Colt tightened the saddle straps, his hands moving with unhurried calm. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. Because he knew what happened when people ran forever. He'd seen good souls break beneath the weight of fear. He'd done his share of running too. But this, standing with them, returning not as discarded women but as rightful owners, this was a step he needed as much as they did. He helped each sister mount, Mara last. When their eyes met, something quiet passed between them, an understanding, a spark, the promise of a life no longer ruled by shame. Then they rode. Not fast. Not in anger. Just steady. 4 figures moving through dawn's pale hush toward a town that had abandoned 3 of them and never bothered to know the 4th. Dust lifted behind them in a soft trailing cloud, like the story of their suffering unraveling in the air. The town that once turned away. Red Bluff's main street emerged slowly, stores still shuttered, lanterns flickering out one by one. As Colt and the sisters approached, heads began to turn. Curtains twitched. A few men stepped outside, hands on belts, unsure but curious. A woman near the water pump froze mid-draw when she saw the Daltons. Her gaze slid down to their torn dresses, their bruises, the mud still caked on their hems. Her lips pressed thin, but something in her eyes, maybe regret, maybe shame, softened. Sheriff Lang Beaumont was the first to approach the group, hat low, his stride all false authority. "Well now," he said, scratching his beard, "you all got nerve comin' back. Thought we made it clear we didn't want no trouble." "It wasn't trouble," Mara replied, voice steady. "It was help we were asking for." Colt rode a step forward, slow and deliberate. "And you turned em away." Lang's jaw tightened. "Wasn't my problem." "It is now," Colt said. Something in Colt's voice made the sheriff shift his footing. A few townsfolk gathered, whispering, drawn by the calm intensity in the cowboy's posture. Elias Venter arrives. The rumble of new hoofbeats cut through the morning. Elias Venter emerged on a broad chestnut stallion, 2 hired riders flanking him. His coat was immaculate, his expression smug in the way only a man who thinks the law belongs to him can manage. "Well, well," Elias said with a lazy grin. "Runaways found their way back. Can't say you Daltons learn quick." Unia flinched but stayed upright. Lark bristled. Mara folded her arms, standing taller. Colt remained still, his silence heavy. Elias's gaze slid to Colt. "You the one playin' hero?" Colt didn't answer. Heroes were men who bragged. Colt was just a man doing what he wished someone had done for his sister. Mara stepped forward, pulling a small rusted tin box from her bag, the one their father had hidden before he died. She opened it with trembling fingers, revealing the deed inside, yellowed and worn but unquestionably signed. "This land is ours," she said. "Law says so." The crowd leaned in. Elias let out a short laugh. "Paper don't mean much if the sheriff don't enforce it." All eyes turned to Sheriff Lang. Lang swallowed hard. The weight of the town's gaze pressed on him in a way it never had before. Last time, the sisters had stood alone. Now they stood with Colt, and the eyes of every soul in Red Bluff. Unia stepped forward, voice soft, but steady in the way a small flame refuses to die. "You let them throw us in the mud," she said. "You watched us walk out without water. We nearly died." Silence spread like dawn light over frost. Lark lifted her chin. "You gonna say that's justice?" Lang's breath stuttered. Colt's voice finally broke the hush. "Sheriff, you got one choice. Uphold the deed, or show this town what kind of man you are." The murmur of the crowd deepened. A farmer removed his hat. A woman reached out and gently squeezed Unia's shoulder as if apologizing not with words, but her presence. Lang's face reddened. He looked at Elias, then at the sisters, then at the crowd. He exhaled. "The deed stands." His voice cracked. "Dalton's land is theirs by law." A ripple passed through the crowd, surprise, relief, maybe a hint of redemption. Elias's jaw clenched. "You'll regret this." Colt's hand drifted to his holster, not drawing, just resting, just reminding. "Let it go, Venter." Elias stared, rage burning behind his eyes, then jerked his reins and galloped out of town, his riders struggling to keep up. A new road, a new breath. The townsfolk drifted away in small clusters, some offering nods, others awkward apologies. Someone pressed a loaf of bread into Lark's arms. Another draped a shawl over Mara's shoulders. The sisters weren't celebrated, not yet. But neither were they invisible anymore. Colt escorted them back to their ravaged land, now legally theirs again. The charred remains of their cabin stood black against the bright morning, but where some men saw ruin, the sisters saw home. "It'll take time to rebuild," Mara whispered. Unia touched Colt's arm. "Will you stay a while?" Lark smirked. "Or at least visit." Colt felt something warm rise in his chest, gentle as new fire-licking kindling. "I reckon I might," he said. Mara met his gaze. Not a smile, something deeper. Something that could grow if tended carefully. Hope stood tall there, brighter than the ashes.